For the Republican Party, Ronald Reagan was running for the presidency, while George Bush was running as his VP. They won with 55.07% of the popular vote. For the Democratic Party, James Carter was running for presidency, while Walter Mondale was running as his VP. They lost the state of Colorado with 31.07% of the vote. President Carter could not keep inflation down, and he was unsuccessful in releasing American hostages in Tehran. The Republicans gained control of the Senate for the first time in 25 years. Early polling data and the media had a huge effect on this election. Approximately 12% of voters were less likely to vote after hearing any type of election coverage, based on what exit polls said. During the debate with Reagan, Carter made the mistake of, one, trying to take shots at Reagan, such as calling him an unstable warmonger. But Reagan was too popular for this, and it didn't faze him. The next day, Carter realized that nearly 10% of the popular vote had dropped and had 440 electoral college votes. This is the first loss by an elected presidential incumbent since President Hoover had been defeated in 1932. During the 1992 presidential election, there were two deciding factors for voters. In 1991, the military was defeating Iraq, and it raised Bush's approval rating by 91%. The second thing that impacted voters was the Persian Gulf War. During this time, the Democrats were being affected by the recession in 1990. He was also challenged by Pat Buchanan to run for the Republican nomination. One of his associates, Lee Atwater, who helped with running his campaign in 1988, had a brain tumor and died 1 year later. I believe this had something to do with Bush's downfall. A man named Ross Perot, who was a Texas billionaire, had repeatedly tried to unseat Bush for 2 years now, so he was withdrawn his contributions from both political parties. William Clinton was endorsed by some Southern Democrat governors. In the 2000 presidential election, George W. Bush was running for president, and Dick Cheney was his running mate for the Republican nominations. For the Democratic nominations, Al Gore was running as president, and Senator Joe Lieberman was his running mate. According to CNN exit polls, 90% of African Americans voted for Al Gore. Males voted for Bush, while females voted for Gore. People with a higher income voted for Bush, and people with a lower income voted for Gore. The only thing that influenced the race was Latino voters. The Hispanic population grew from more than 70% since 1990, and 17% of Coloradians were Hispanic voters. Voter registration was also a huge impact on the votes in Colorado. I don't think Gore could have done anything to really change the vote. There was a recount in Florida, but after the recounts were reviewed by the Supreme Court, there was nothing he could do. The win was already awarded to Bush. Bush was endorsed by the Denver Rocky Mountain News, and Al Gore was endorsed by the Denver Post and the Durango Herald. During the 2008 presidential election, the incumbent was a huge deciding factor for Colorado, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin because of over 5 million jobs dependent on trade. Some key points of the election were Barack Obama winning 67% of the Latino vote and McCain only won 32%. The lack of support from the Latino community for the Republican Party between 2004 and 2008 was part of an electoral movement away from the GOP. The only thing I think McCain could have done to win the 2008 election was to appeal more to the Hispanic community. It seems like they had the majority, so if he persuaded them to vote for him rather than Obama, he might have won the election. The Denver Post, Aspen Daily News, Daily Camera, Cortez Journal, and the Durango Herald endorsed President Obama. The Daily Sentinel, Longmont Tom's Call, and the Pueblo Chieftain endorsed John McCain during the 2008 presidential election. During the 1994 midterms of Colorado, all of the incumbents you see here were re-elected. Some of the key issues during 1993 and 1994 were how the Democrats passed a number of gun control laws on federal and state levels. Another issue during this time was same-sex marriage. David Skaggs, sponsored bills such as to repeal the Line Item Veto Act of 1997, Northern Colorado Headwaters Wellness Act of 1998, and to prohibit the Student Loan Marketing Association. In 2006, the governor midterms, Bill Ritter Jr. was the gubernatorial candidate for the Democratic Party, and Bob Bierpress was running for the Republican Party. Bill Ritter Jr. won with 56.99% of the vote, while Bob lost with 40.16% of the vote. The key events during this race were during a Denver debate on September 18th. The issue was health care. During another debate on October, Bob Bierpress scolded Ritter on issues about illegal immigration. Ritter is endorsed by both the Rocky Mountain News and the Denver Post. Bob Bierpress was endorsed by GOP presidential nominee and the Governor Mitt Romney. For the Senator's midterm, Wayne Aller was a Republican candidate for the senatorial race, and Ken Salazar was the Democratic candidate. The House midterms were Marilyn N. Musgrave was a Republican, Douglas L. M. Lamborn was a Republican, Tom Tancredo was a Republican, Diana L. DeGette was the Democrat, Mark Udall was a Democrat, and John Tony Salazar was a Democrat. 2010 midterms. For the Senate election, Michael Bennet was the incumbent for the Democratic Party. He won with 48.1% of the vote. Ken Buck was running against him for the Republican Party. He lost with 46.4% of the vote. Bennet had better finances for this race, which made it easier for him to win the election. The Denver Post endorses Bennet for his campaign. For governor, John Hickenlooper swept the floor with 51% of the vote. He defeated Tom Tancredo, who was nominated by the American Constitution Party. He also defeated Republican candidate Don Baez, who only won 11.1% of the vote. For the House elections for 2010, for the first district, it was Democratic candidate DeGette, who was an incumbent, who won with 67.4% of the vote. For the second district, another Democratic candidate, Polis, who was also an incumbent, won with 57.4% of the vote. The third district, Tipton, who was a Republican candidate, won with 50.1%. The fourth district, Republican candidate Cory Gardner, won with 52.5% of the vote. Fifth district, Republican candidate Lamborn, who was an incumbent, won with 65.8% of the vote. The sixth district, Republican candidate Kaufman, who was an incumbent, won with 65.7% of the vote. In the last district, District 7, Democratic candidate Perlmutter, who was also an incumbent, won with 53.4% of the vote. Only 5 districts kept their incumbents. It was key for women to vote during this election. Key issues during these midterms were same-sex marriage and health care. For the 2014 midterms, Senator Cory Gardner was the Republican candidate. Mark Udall was the Democratic candidate also running for senator. Key points during this election was the battle over independent female voters and women's reproductive rights. Cory Gardner received most of the Hispanic vote, and Colorado is usually a Democratic state. However, after the election, Cory Gardner won.